Okay, how's that? Does that work?
Yeah.
Is that as good?
Oh, I can hear myself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Do you have headphones?
Let me go see if I could find another pair. I just broke this pair. Hang on.
Добрый вечер, дамы и господа.
This may take a few minutes.
Oh, sorry, Robert. У нас небольшие и внезапные технические сложности. Роберт с нами вышел на связь, как вы видите. Очень рад всех видеть. К сожалению, прямо перед началом эфира у него сломался микрофон и наушники. Он сейчас сходит, быстренько починит или найдет новое. Вечер добрый, дорогие зрители. Еще раз очень рад, что говорят, к нам присоединилось очень много человек. Итак, с нами на связи Роберт Сапольский. Сейчас он придет и будет здесь, из собственного дворика. Мы сейчас будем говорить на английском языке, поэтому, надеюсь, все смогут понять. Вы можете задавать вопросы в чате, можно на русском, можно на английском. Пожалуйста, придерживайтесь темы и будьте уважительны и не спамьте, потому что у нас есть модераторы, которые будут за всем следить. Сегодня, как уже писалось в наших анонсах, мы будем говорить про свободу воли, точнее, про ее отсутствие, про то, какие последствия для вопросов морали и справедливости это несет. И так у нас улучшается техническая сторона нашей беседы.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Okay, I just stole one of my kids' headphones.
I hope they will forgive us.
Sound better?
Just small adjustments. Yeah, I think you sound fine.
Good. Okay.
I mean, it's a live stream, and we're in the midst of pandemic, so it's okay. I think everybody's.
We'll cope. We'll manage.
Yeah. There we go. So once again, we have more than 1,000 people watching us. Actually, 1,086 subscribers, and I guess the chat is now going crazy, saying nice things and that they're glad to see you and praising everything and being very grateful.
Well, you sent me a link to a short clip that was like just one of the nicest things anyone has done for me in a long time. That was really nice. So thank you to the people who made that. Very much appreciated.
Oh, that's actually great. And that's actually not all, because I've been receiving this couple of more videos later after that. And also we have some, I think while people are gathering, we can spend just a little bit time for that, because we actually received also lots of different people send their letters saying hi and saying thanks. People send the different pictures, and everybody was very grateful and was saying nice things to you. And if that will work.
Well, that's really nice, and I'm very glad you guys put the effort into translating those lectures. That's really wonderful that you did that.
Unfortunately, there is some problem for some reason with me sharing the screen, but I will send you all the videos, and I will send you all the letters, and I will send you all the pictures that people have sent me. And so, yeah, everything for you.
Crazy. Okay, thank you.
And actually, is that a siren?
Yes.
Okay. And which actually proves that we are live.
Yes, we are.
Because we don't. we did not anticipate that. And another good news, actually, we had the second lecture gone over 1 million views. The second lecture in Russian.
That's really nice. I wish my parents could hear that. That's very pleasing.
Well, at least you know that, and I think it's great. And I mean, people keep watching, and now we have lots of people seeing you right now. And actually, we also had lots of questions. We received lots of questions for this talk, and we had lots of questions of our own. Mainly concerning the free will controversy. Let's put it this way. And I think before getting deep into that and getting closer to actually your book that you're working on, which deals the lack of free will and the consequences of that, when you say that there is no free will, what exactly do you mean by free will? Because it seems to confuse lots of people.
Sure. And, you know, I've been forced to read all sorts of philosophers who write about free will, and it's agony because I don't understand what they're saying. And they're terrible writers, and I'm a terrible reader, and it's very hard. And they have endless definitions of free will. Provisionally, I'm using kind of a reductive definition, and it's obviously silly, but it's still how at the end of the day you need to think. Someone does a behavior. They take their finger and it does that. Their brain tells them to do that to their finger. That's like as simple, fundamental of a behavior as you can imagine. And it's totally inconsequential action that happens to be very consequential because you're pulling a trigger. Whoa, okay, so this is the production of behavior that really matters. And neurobiologists can go and find the neuron in your motor cortex, which sent the signal to those muscles to flex. And you could find the neurons in what are called the premotor cortex, which sent signals which triggered that motor cortex to send that signal. And you could then find neurons in the frontal cortex that triggered that, and find neurons in the prefrontal cortex that triggered that, and neurons in emotional parts of the brain that triggered those neurons. And basically show me the neuron that started that cascade, a neuron that fired, that had an action potential for no reason whatsoever. A neuron whose firing was not regulated by the physical laws of the universe, that happened for no prior causal antecedent reason. Show me a neuron that started that and that works that way, and then we could talk about free will. You've just shown me some sort of neurobiological building block for free will, and it's just not there. There's no causeless cause. There's nothing in the biology of our behavior that just happens from out of nowhere. Every single biological event that we have has a history.
And what about, for example, something very, very complex? Because from all the objections we received in the comment section when we announced the topic, lots of people actually say that their conscious thought, there's some action that they really thought through, something that they did using self-control, a choice that they make not by some spontaneous emotion and just wanting something, but actually thought it through, that is example of free will.
And unfortunately, I think that's nonsense. And the best way to show that is the endless ways in which we behave for reasons that we're not even conscious of. Here's one study. You take Christian people And in this study, you look at attitudes towards Muslims, how much hostility there is or isn't, and there's music playing in the background. And if you happen to be playing church music at a very low versus classical music, if you're playing church music, people express more hostility to members of other religions. If you've just walked down a street and either you walk down this way or this way, and this way has a church in it, and you've just walked past a church, in a questionnaire afterward, you are likely to be more hostile to members of other religions. If you put somebody in a room and you have them fill out a questionnaire about their political attitudes, should abortion be legal? Should gay marriage be legal? Things of that sort. If you have a horrible, rotten smell in that room, if it smells like rotting garbage in there, people become more socially conservative. They become more socially intolerant. On the other hand, if you have somebody playing an economic game where they have to make decisions about generosity, if they're sitting in a room and it smells like chocolate chip cookies that have just come out of the oven, and this is actual scientific studies, you could buy a little vial of chocolate chip smell or a little vial of like rotting carcass smell or whatever, and people would like do that in the studies. If you're smelling freshly baked bread or cookies, people become more generous. And nobody is going to sit there and attribute their behavior to those factors. One incredibly important study looking at more than 5,000 decisions that judges made in courtrooms, and the single best predictor of whether they were going to parole someone, allow them to go free, or send them back to jail for another whatever number of years, the single best predictor was how many hours it had been since the judge had eaten a meal. If you appeared before the judge right after you had lunch, 60% chance of being freed. By 2 hours later, 0% chance. And that study has stood up to all sorts of like challenges and such. And no judge, if you sat them down there and asked them to use their conscious awareness to say, whoa, that's really interesting. You freed that guy, but this guy you sent back to jail. How come? They're going to cite some philosopher that they learned about their first year in college. They're not going to say, because of my blood glucose levels, an enormous percentage of our behavior is occurring awareness. And what is very often the case, and neurobiology proves this, is when we think we are making a conscious decision, especially a conscious moral decision, we have emotionally decided long before that, seconds before that, and our conscious, rational, cerebral part of the brain is just making up an explanation.
So, if there are so many factors that can influence our decisions, even the conscious ones, which some people think of as examples of free will, does that actually imply complete determinism on what we do and how we act?
Okay, that's like such a hard question. Is the debate whether we have less free will than is usually the case, or is the debate whether we have no free will at all? Most of the people who wind up being skeptical about free will wind up concluding there's much less of it than we used to think. I personally think there is no free will whatsoever. I think there is none at all. But the moral issues, the controversy, the challenges become exactly the same, whether you think there's a lot less free will when it comes to some of our best behaviors and worst behaviors, or if there's none at all, which is in circumstances you are going to be blaming someone for a behavior they had no control over, or you're going to be praising someone or rewarding them. But the question becomes, oh yeah, if you think there's no free will at all, how come you can't predict which child who is raised in poverty is going to become a criminal when they're an adult? How come you can't predict which person with the elevated testosterone levels is going to like say something nasty to someone versus they're going to pull out a knife. Can you predict that? And I now spend a lot of my time in courtrooms teaching juries about the brain during murder trials, trying to convince them that this person, with the way their brain works, if that was your brain, you would have done the same exact thing. And the prosecutor, who then always gets to like question me very hostilely for hours, what they always say is, okay, so science is teaching us there's much less free will, That's great. Can you take somebody and look at their brain if they've had damage to their frontal cortex and say, this is someone who is going to be outside the controls of society? When they're at a funeral, they're going to laugh loudly at some point. Oh my God, what's wrong with them? Versus this person with the same amount of brain damage is going to be outside the laws of society. They're going to murder 8 people. Can science tell us these days which person is which? And I always have to give the same answer: absolutely not. We're not there yet. All we're good at now is if you have damage to this part of the brain, at some point you're going to do something that shows that you are socially unconstrained by a lot of the standard rules of behavior. Is it going to be laughing loudly at a funeral, or is it going to be being a murderer? Okay, we've learned a little bit more. If you were raised in a stable, loving, middle-class home, you're less likely to be the murderer. You're more likely to be the one who'll just like laugh loudly in the wrong circumstance. Whoa, that's where the science has gotten us at this point. So you say, okay, don't tell me about there's no free will. We can't look at any of that stuff yet. But the point that I always wind up making is, yeah, that's true. But look at what we know about the biology of behavior at this point, and 99% of it we've learned in the last century. 50% of it we've learned in the last 10 years. 25% of it we've learned in the last year. So either you've got to sit there and say, that's it, tonight at midnight, there's no more science. We've learned all the science we can ever learn. Can you predict who's going to be a murderer? And the answer is no. We could predict who's going to be socially inappropriate, but that's about as far as the science has taken us. But you have to be crazy to think that the science is not going to continue to rise at the same exact fast pace. One way of reframing that is, we are going to learn the things that we call free will now. We're going to discover a century from now or a year from now that no, it's actually a biological phenomenon. Or stated another way, a circumstance in which we feel now that we are acting morally and rationally in holding somebody responsible for their actions, for punishing them, for killing them, for jailing them, for praising them, for giving them extra money, for telling them they're so smart and wonderful and kind. At some point in the future, there's a good chance we're going to sit there and look back at this and say, oh my God, the things we didn't know about then, the damage that we did thinking we understood behavior, and that there was choice and responsibility and agency. And that's not just going to be scientists 300 years from now. Almost certainly, we're going to last long enough to sit there, and in some of these realms, we're going to say, my God, the way I've treated people in my life, thinking that there was responsibility at that juncture, and we had no idea about that part of the brain, that hormone, that neurotransmitter, that gene, that childhood experience, whatever. My God, the damage that we have done.
So, but still, does that mean determinism and even fate? I mean, I'm not saying it's, unpredictable, because very complex and science is not there yet. But on its basis, does that imply some kind of determinism, being all our actions determined by genetics, then prenatal period, then our upbringing and stuff like that? Would you, would you sign under that statement that
Absolutely. Because show me a neuron that started a behavior, and it started it for reasons that had nothing to do with 1 second before, 1 minute before, 1,000 years before, biophysics, molecular biology, childhood experience, etc. There is no such neuron. There is no behavior that we do, and there's no bit of biology that are the building blocks of our behavior that come with zero history. There's always an antecedent cause. It never comes from nowhere. And the nowheres, or rather the antecedent causes, are always about luck, biological luck. Whose womb you spent 9 months in, which genes you got, what socioeconomic status you were raised in, how big your adrenal gland was this morning secreting hormones. All of it are things that we can't be held responsible for.
And okay, maybe not responsibility, but against determinism, there is a strong argument that at least people often make, the quantum mechanics, like the randomness of quantum mechanics, the Heisenberg. I'm just translating what people, what's like one of the big objections against like overall determinism is that.
Okay, ironically, the last month of my life has been miserable because the planet is falling apart and democracy in my country is collapsing. And here in San Francisco, we're having fires so bad we've supposed to have been staying indoors for the last week. And in addition, because I've spent the last month trying to write a chapter about quantum mechanics and how it doesn't explain free will. Okay, let me try to do this. For 3 reasons. Number 1, quantum mechanics is all about at the subatomic level. Wave-particle duality, quantum entanglement, non-locality over space and time, quantum tunneling, these are all the things that are occurring at a subatomic level. And if that's going to have anything to do with why you are a good, kind person or why you are a selfish horror, those quantum effects are going to have to bubble up 20, 30 orders of magnitude to begin to explain a single action potential, which takes about 3 or 4 milliseconds. That is about 10 to the 23rd times longer in duration than a quantum effect, than a quant in an electron. That's a hell of what you need to do to get to just that level of biology. And what 99% of the people in the field agree is you cannot get the bubbling up. Even if a quantum effect in this one synapse has synchronized through like superposition and quantum entanglement and such, has entangled the events of 4,000 other synapses, you're using about 1 trillion synapses, emptying about 1 trillion axon terminals full of neurotransmitter every time you do an action. There's very little evidence that it bubbles up. The second big problem is in some ways the even more fundamental one, which is even if it did bubble up that high, the gigantic problem is quantum indeterminacy cannot be the explanation for free will. It could be the explanation for us doing stupid, random things that are completely out of character for us. It's the explanation for us doing things where we would then say, I have no idea why I just said that. Except you wouldn't be able to say that because your tongue muscles would be doing stupid, random things and you wouldn't even be able to speak. When we think about free will, we're not trying to understand the randomness. We're trying to understand why, Gandhi was almost certainly like a more than average moral 10-year-old as he was as a 75-year-old. We're trying to understand the things that make up consistency, and quantum indeterminacy, sort of the most subatomic level of randomness, is not where we get the consistency of a moral philosophy coming from, or your character, or your outlook on life, or the fact that whether you offer somebody $1 of money or $1 million worth of money to do something awful, if they have a voice in their head saying that's not who I am, that's going to explain some consistency. The final problem is, nevertheless, there's a whole bunch of thinkers out there, and they are almost certainly philosophers rather than neurobiologists, who try to magically pull a nuffling up to get it up to the behavior we're interested in, and magically find a means by which you can harness the randomness of indeterminacy and harness it into something determinate and philosophically consistent. And the problem with that is, I'm being polite here, you read this and it just does not make sense what these people are postulating. There are ways in which your conscious free will can reach down and change your electron orbitals, and from that your brain will work differently. The ways in which you get around the bubbling up problem and the randomness problem make no sense at all. So at great length here, that's why I think quantum indeterminacy has nothing to do with why you pick up this knife at this moment or why you pick up this fork, and it certainly has nothing to do with moral philosophy.
Thanks. I mean, I hope, dear viewers, I hope that cleared the majority of the questions considering quantum effects on our brains. But here is some things. Okay, if there is no free will and everything is determined, and then there is no blame to put on people, there is kind of no responsibility for what they do. That kind of implies a certain view on the world. And if you personally, when did you actually realize that you had no free will, and how did it feel? And does it actually have effect on your everyday life?
It was about a month after my 13th birthday, and in my very strict religious studies that I went to almost every day of the week, something came up in there, and it produced a huge existential crisis in me of how to reconcile this with God and our actions and being held responsible for our actions and being punished for them, yet God controlled that, and that's the way he chose to make the world, and all of that. And I was going to my teachers and bringing this up. And then one night I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I said, oh, I get it. There's no God. And then about 3 minutes later, I said, and there's no free will either. And then about 2 minutes after that, I said, and there's no purpose to life. And I actually sat up for about 5 hours at that point and scribbled out everything that I was thinking. And ever since then, I have had zero capacity for religiosity, for spirituality, for believing that there's free, for believing that the universe is anything other than cold and empty and unempathic and pointless. And you know what? I've been depressed ever since. I think that is an unavoidable outcome of that. Like, we get an awful lot of sense of purpose and sense of comfort and sense of safety from our myths, and the notion is one of those. Like, stop. Is that worth doing? Unfortunately, I think absolutely yes.
That was actually one question, and now I feel bad because some lady, she asked why why your eyes are so sad and full of sorrow. And I told her that, like, no, they're not. I mean, it's just her interpretation. Turns out I was wrong.
Well, I wish she were my therapist. I suspect she has very good instincts for that. Um, yeah, I'm depressive as hell. Um, you show me something wonderful that happens in the world. You show me something terrible that happens in the world, and I feel depressed. You show me something wonderful that happens in the world, and somehow I'm going to be convinced why that's poignant and that's bittersweet, and why it's not going to last, and why it's wonderful amid so much pain and all of that. And or I joke about this with my wife, who is not at all depressive, but she tends towards anxiety. Anxiety is when you're constantly worried that something terrible is going to happen to your children, happen to your loved ones, whatever. Depression is when you feel absolutely confident that nothing bad is going to happen. Your children are safe, they are loved, they are going to have long, happy, productive lives. And it's so sad you can barely stand it. It's so sad. Somehow you can turn that into the same conclusion. So yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of my mindset. And, I've been incredibly lucky in all sorts of ways. That's one way in which my brain chemistry has not been lucky for me.
Actually, one of the questions from the comment section from YouTube, I'll just gonna read. All of my life, 28 years, I suffer from depression and anxiety. Is there a way to live happily, to live happy life without medication? And thank you for your work. The person also added.
If you're
I think
very
perfect
lucky,
question for you.
It's a phenomenal question. It's so important, and it is so relevant to millions of people. If you are very, very lucky, you were one of the people where you have one episode of major depression, you heal. Statistically, it's no more likely to happen to you than to anybody else. You have two episodes, you have three or four, still the same thing. You get four or five or so, and that's where statistically you are now likely to have joined the cadre of people who are going to be clinically depressed on and off for the rest of their lives. A lucky subset of those people, it resolves. Often as you get older, if the depression doesn't go away, the edge, the razor quality to it can go away, but that's lucky. For the most part, you need psychotherapy, professional or otherwise, or you're going to need meds. And one of the clearest things out there is if you have a choice, if you have severe problems with depression, and if you have a choice between psychotherapy or medication, your choice is to do both, because they work much better synergistically than either alone. You want to think of it as what the medication does is it breaks the back of the depression. It gets you a first foothold on the beach. And what the psychotherapy now allows you to do is be able to actually have the psychic energy to start doing the hard work to figure out how you got there and how you can do things differently to change that. The two of them in combination are far better. And amid that, an important thing to emphasize, at least in the United States, there's a frequent critique of psychiatry, political left, and I'm about as much of a leftist as you can get. Nonetheless, there's this critique that, psychiatric medication, they're abused, they're the means by which psychiatry is the whore of governments and suppression. They just serve the means of pharmaceutical companies to make money and profits. Yes, it is the case that a lot of these drugs are over-medicated, and they're medicated at the convenience of some doctor, or they're medicated for people who are society's troublemakers. Yes, all of that. But at the same time, if you are one of the millions of people who have a serious problem with clinical depression, and it is not treated, it is one of the most life-threatening diseases that exists on this planet in terms of the likelihood of it destroying the quality of your life or destroying your life. And it is not a measure of your moral failings or your lack of sufficient backbone or free will. It is a biochemical genetic disorder of your brain chemistry being screwed up. And often the first critical way of saving you from that, in the most literal possible way, is medication. So when it's used right, thank God for it.
Yeah. And I really hope that the person who asked that will watch that. So yeah, take an advice from a specialist and who actually is experiencing. And speaking of medications, actually, one thing: have you watched The Joker, the movie that came out recently?
No. It
Not
keeps being on my
okay.
list of movies to watch, and he's an amazing actor, and I'm just seeing the color of his suit is kind of scary in all the trailers. I take it's an exercise in him being a very, very damaged human who winds up being very, very damaging.
Yeah, okay. Well, not to go into spoiler territory, but I mean, probably everybody knows who Joker is, and yeah, I mean, it's okay. As soon as you watch it, we can, and if you will be in the mood, or we can have another call. I think that would be a big one, because at least in pop culture at this point, it seems that movie is used a lot as thing that kind of shows kind of real consequences of government and society not caring about people with different psychological, psychiatrical disorders, including depression and anxiety, which I think, I don't remember actually if there is a diagnosis. Yeah. So people are praising, one of the things that people saying good things about that movie is how it portrays the disorder and the consequences. And yeah, it is a damaged person damaging everybody around. And so it would be very interesting, I think, and maybe even important to have a point of view of a person who actually knows about this topic to kind of say their word. So yeah, please watch it, and if you have thoughts to share, we'll be very happy to talk about that.
Well,
Yeah.
my guess is if I'm already saying nothing comes from nowhere, no behavior, no matter how good or bad, comes from a lack of history without any previous biology that gave rise to it, biology that is totally shaped by environment. I have a sneaky feeling by the end of the movie, I'm not going to be in favor of saying that the Joker has a bad soul.
Yeah, and that's we'll see. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong. I should probably go see
Okay.
it.
No. It's actually interesting to have like a critical view of person who has actually knows the biology and behavioral problems to evaluate that. But moving
Actually,
to maybe a little, yeah.
if we could pause a second, embarrassingly, I thought my computer was sufficiently charged, and it's getting pretty low. What will work better, for me to run into the house with the computer and find a spot to sit there by a charger, or for me to run into the house and get an extension cord and a charger and plug it back in here?
Whichever is faster and more suitable for you. I think, for me personally, I think it would be interesting to now see a little tour around your backyard and your house, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, we will do that. I will run in very quickly. Passing for starters, the dog who is asleep here, who fortunately has not been barking. But we are now going to run through very quickly because the house is a mess, and this is truly embarrassing for the 1,000 people out there who are watching this. So quickly we go through the dark, showing nothing about the mess it is here. And
we can see a t-shirt. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, the light.
Okay. Yeah, can you add some light, please?
Yes.
Oh, it's a familiar setting.
Yes, yes. It's the best lit place to sit in the house. So yes, that was the house. It's a mess.
Well, you're working on a book, so it's kind of okay. By the way, people are asking. People didn't hear that part about the whiteboard. Why do you have a whiteboard in your backyard?
Well, most ultimately, because we have a crazy heartless president in the United States. But let me reframe that a bit. Because of governmental neglect, the pandemic is completely out of control here. And among other things, most universities have not been able to open. It's just not safe. My daughter, who's still a university student, is at home doing her semester remotely, and I'm doing all of my teaching remotely. So the board out there is I start teaching next week, and hopefully the weather is going to stay good so I can actually like teach my classes sitting outside there. So that's the plan.
That's an interesting approach to like lecturing in Stanford University.
Well, every now and then, when the weather's particularly nice, there are people, professors will take their class out to sit on the lawn and teach. And almost always what happens is everybody is much happier afterward, but they have paid virtually no attention at all to the professors. So there's downsides to it.
By the way, we had an interesting comment again from somebody who claims to be your ex-student and asking if you're going to teach if you're planning on teaching in any other universities.
As far as I know, no, I haven't heard any rumors that I'm going to be fired. I kind of like it here. Stanford's a very good university. It's kind of an amazing one. It's an incredibly privileged one. So I have no current plans for that happening, but maybe this ex-student knows something that I don't.
No, I think it was just somebody's just interested in what your plans are. Okay, I think we can. Oh, yeah, the bright side I want to take our talk to is that actually we received one of the letters saying thank you from a lady whose name is Yelena, and she actually also said that she's living with OCD and depression, and that actually your lectures and your books helped her to handle that. So in terms of how to live, yeah, I mean, your lecturers are doing good things for
Well,
people and actually helping.
that's good to hear, and that's so important in the realm of mental illness. I mean, the problem with depression is the word depression, at least in English, both explains, something crummy happens to you and you feel kind of depressed for the rest of the day and you're sort of in a bad mood. And the same word describes this disease that destroys your life. And what we're mostly surrounded by are people who get depressed because something crummy happens, and a day later or even a week later, they get better. And hey, why is it that you have not been able to get out of bed for the last 3 months because life feels so pointless? Why don't I have the self-discipline that these people do? Why don't I have the gumption? Why don't I have the strength to work my way through, to fight through this and get over this depression? And that's an incredibly damaging viewpoint. A major depression is as biological of a disorder as is diabetes. And you don't sit down somebody with diabetes and say, oh, come on, what's the deal with you and insulin? Stop babying yourself. You don't really need this insulin stuff. It is as real of a disease, and the fact that society stigmatizes it and most other psychiatric disorders is tragic, if for no other reason, that it makes people less likely to seek help.
Well, we really hope that that will change, and because I mean it's the same thing in Russian depression, and actually it's kind of a fashionable thing now to be depressed among among those young kids, all those Zoomers.
Yes.
And yeah, not sure that it is actually a good thing when a thing that actually is a term becomes widespread and used for, it kind of diminishes the danger.
Yep. Well, of course, the stereotype is that you folks there are nothing but depressed all the time, sitting there reading Dostoevsky and drinking vodka and being suicidal. But I'm glad to hear that that is not generally the case in Russia.
At least for now, I hope it's not.
Yeah.
Well, moving back to our other very, how to say, lively and bright point of absence of free will. So, okay, there is no free will, but we have a feeling that we have a free will. We act as if we have a free will. In terms of evolution, is that adaptive, or is just what do you call a spandrel, just some accident? This illusion of having free will.
Great. It might have originally been a spandrel, but it's extremely adaptive now, in that it allows most of us to get up in the morning, and it allows most of us to feel like we are part of something a lot bigger than ourselves, and it allows us to like get through very difficult times. But it's also a disaster if you are, by anyone's standards, a failure in life for reasons you had no control over. And yet society has taught you that it is your fault. You should have been able to avoid that. If you are not as accomplished or rich or beautiful or famous or who knows what as the next person, free will, you should have been able to do that. There is an incredibly destructive soundbite in the United States that every child is taught in school, which is anybody can grow up to be president. And like, with one exception, every single president we have had has been a wealthy, white Christian male. So if you grew up and you're in jail as a drug addict, instead of being president, well, whose fault is it? So it cuts both ways. What I think you see is the myths that we make up for ourselves, whether it's a myth about free will and agency, or a myth that there is a God who loves us, or any other such myth, they can be very, very good at reducing anxiety. But what they are mostly doing is reducing anxiety that myth invented in the first place.
Speaking of motivation, and for some people, for lots of people actually, being free in their choice is, as you said, a way to get up in the morning. But how do you stay motivated if you accept the idea that there is no free will? How do you stay motivated? How do you enjoy, maybe not life in general, but how do you praise yourself? How do you get any enjoyment from accomplishments if you accept that there is no free will?
It's hard. I don't have terribly good answers for that. You have to externalize some of your sources of pleasure. It is great that I've done those thousands of hours of practicing, because I just made an audience of people very happy playing that sonata on the piano for them, rather than, whoa, I am a great pianist. I've just come up with a vaccine that will cure COVID. And, saving millions of lives has to count for something. Yeah, that's great. And soon we're all like Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela. And we all know that, like, it's very hard to be that selfless and Buddhist and detached in our, like, sense of purpose in life. And instead, we need exactly the sort of things that losing a sense of free will destroys. It's kind of a drag. it's not a great thing until you look closely, and sometimes it's the most wonderful thing on earth. A great historical example of it, where, as I was saying earlier, wow, there's all sorts of stuff where it's not waiting 300 years from now, scientists would just say, oh my God, the things they used to believe, the damage that they did, where people lived long enough to be saying that about what they themselves had done at a younger age. It's 1950. You have a 17-year-old child who is beginning to act in a very thought-disordered way. They're not making sense. They say things that make no sense. They're hearing voices. They're hallucinating. You take them to a doctor, and it's the most heartbreaking thing imaginable. They say, it looks like your child has this disease called schizophrenia, and it's devastating and all of that. And eventually, after they're telling you, no, there isn't a cure and it's likely to destroy their life and all of that, eventually you get around to saying, where did this disease come from? What caused this disease? And if it was 1950, the wisest psychiatrists on earth, the wisest neuroscientists would have had an answer. They would say, it's you. You, the mother of that child, you caused your child schizophrenia. And something that was called schizophrenogenic mothering, a mothering style that generated schizophrenia. It started off as a Freudian notion, but it festered in all sorts of poisonous directions. And the basic core of it was that a horrible mothering style could produce schizophrenia. And it was a mothering style that was built around a mother who unconsciously hated her child and wished that the child hadn't been born. Oh my God. And thus you were teaching hundreds of thousands of mothers for decades that they caused their child schizophrenia. And then in the mid-1950s, along came biochemists who discovered the first drug out there that had antipsychotic effects. And it worked not by going back in time and making your mother actually love you. It made you go back in time. It made you block dopamine receptors in your brain. And everyone sat there. And in some cases, the psychiatrist didn't sit there. It took them about 20, 30 years to sit there and say, oh my God, it wasn't the mothering. It's a crappy biochemical disorder. It's brain chemistry. It's not the wrong kind of incompetent mothering. And what is remarkable is hundreds of thousands of parents of schizophrenics, that was one of the most wonderful days of their life, because they had been told, at the very least, this is the most tragic thing any parent can see happen to their child, but at least it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And I've actually talked to, there's organizations in the United States, alliances of parents of schizophrenic children and support groups and all of that. And I've talked to the founders of these organizations, and they are all in their 90s now. And they say that it was one of the most freeing, liberating moments of their lives, the first time they truly accepted that they had not caused this disease. And the same thing happened with autism. Autism, up until the 1970s or so, the dogma was if your child had autism, you caused it because you could not love your child. And the jargon was you were a refrigerator mother. And then people discovered, no, autism has something to do with prenatal endocrine environments, and there's genes, and we're slowly sorting it out. And remarkably, one of the fathers of autism research and the notion of refrigerated mothers in old age came to a meeting, a support family group, and in front of an audience of 1,000 parents of autistic individuals said, I am so, so sorry for the damage that I did. I thought I was doing good. I thought I was a healer. I thought I had devoted my life to making people's lives less painful, and all I did was spread pain further, and I'm so sorry for what they did. And what is remarkable is you talk to the 90-year-old mothers of schizophrenics with their organizations, and no leader of the school of schizophrenogenic mothering ever sat down and wrote them an essay or appeared before them and say, my God, I saw causality and free will and responsibility where there wasn't, and I am so sorry for the damage that I happened. So, okay, you stop believing in free will. Yes, depression, existential despair, all of that. For a whole lot of people, it's going to be the most wondrous, liberating thing you can imagine.
Another consequence of that is lack of, basically, does that mean absence of responsibility and blame as a concept? Does that mean that you would like to get rid of both of these things?
Absolutely. Does that mean, and by the way, that also gets rid of praise. Does this mean that, oh no, murderers should be allowed to run around in the streets because you can't blame them? Of course not. Of course not. Like if the brakes on a car are not working, you don't allow that car to be driven. It's going to hit somebody and kill them. What you either do is you fix the brakes, or if your behavioral neuroendocrinology is not at the point yet where you know how to fix those broken brakes, you lock the car up in a garage. And that's great. You've protected society from that car, but you don't sit there and say that car deserves not to be able to take a nice ride in a park on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. Deserve, blame, responsibility, justice, retribution. None of those words make any sense at all for making sense of a car whose brakes don't work. And you look at a human whose lousy biological luck has produced someone who is broken in a very damaging way as well, and they're no different from a car with a broken brake. It's, infinitely more complicated broken brakes, and thus we're infinitely further from being able to fix it. But it's the same exact thing. And if you think it is like dehumanizing to turn us into machines with broken brakes, that's a hell of a lot better than sermonizing us into having evil souls. We're very complicated machines. What is clear to me, though, is if it's going to be hard to make people think that way about, murderers, and not thinking in terms of blame, it's 1,000 times hard to think that same way when somebody comes up to you and says, wow, you did such a nice job on that project. Wow, great score on your final. Oh, what a delicious dinner. We're going to say thank you and feel like we in some way are responsible for the praise we're being given. If you're going to throw out blame and punishment, you got to throw out praise and reward as well. And that's at least as big of a challenge.
But you just said that video was one of the nicest things you've seen, and I was going to send you more videos and different pictures.
Yes, what I've just proven is why I'm having so much trouble writing this book, figuring out how we're supposed to live, truly, truly not believing in free will, because anything emotionally arousing comes along and I forget everything that I've learned from my science. But fortunately, I forget it for 30 seconds instead of for 30 years with any luck. The other week, there was some horrible hate crime in the United States where somebody went into a place of worship with a weapon. He belonged ideologically to a group that had been discriminating against that religious group forever, and he opened fire and killed a bunch of people, and it was like a total nightmare. And that Monday morning, the news was saying, oh, this person was brought to court today in this state in the United States and charged with whatever number of counts of murder, whatever. And the way the legal system works here is it's not clear yet if they're also going to be charged with a federal government hate crime. And if they are, they're going to be eligible for the death penalty, to be put to death. And my first thought was, yeah, give him the death penalty, fry that son of a bitch. And then 3 seconds after that, I thought, What are you doing? You were working on a death penalty case right now, trying to keep them from killing somebody who murdered 11 people because his frontal cortex was damaged in childhood. It's really hard not to think that way. Maybe the best we can hope for is when you have a first impulse towards hating someone for what they did. All you can hope for is a year later or a minute later, you can stop yourself and say that behavior did not come from nowhere. And they had no more control over how they turned into who they are than how I turned into who I am.
But here is the thing, and that understanding of the biology of an action, does it really help with this more philosophical problem of like justice and how actually the law should be and how we should be governed? I mean, that's the topic of your book, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep. And it has huge implications. Its logical implication is the entire criminal justice system has to be abolished because it is based on a scientific mindset that was obsolete during the Renaissance, during the medieval periods. It has not been informed by neuroscience for 150 years or so when you look at how it works. We've got to completely get rid of it. And oh my God, that is incredibly hard to think about. And it's also incredibly hard to think about a world in which two people do a job and this person gets more money at it because they're smarter and they could do it more effectively because they had enough protein when they were a fetus so that their brain developed right. Because when they were 10 years old, they were not beaten on a regular basis and stress hormones impaired the development of their brain, et cetera, et cetera. What's a world like where not only does like criminal justice and retribution make no sense at all, but where rewarding people for being better at something than the next person is makes no sense either? It's going to be hard. But again, we can do it in some cases. Schizophrenia is like not any more of a horrible epidemic of a disease. It's still an epidemic and it's still horrible, but it's no more worse because we don't blame mothers anymore because we've learned, it's a biological disorder. In fact, we've gotten much better at making the pain of schizophrenia less because we block people's dopamine receptors instead of ask them what their mother did to them lovelessly when they were a child. So it's going to be very, very difficult, but subtracting blame and subtracting praise out of how we judge behavior because of biology cannot be anything other than liberating and freeing. And at the end of the day, one of the most liberating things we can possibly reach is if you truly, truly believe this stuff, you cannot feel entitled to anything that makes you more special than the next person. And you truly, truly cannot feel hatred for anyone else. And if you really embrace that, and sometimes I can actually feel that way for 4 or 5 seconds before I fall back into old habits, it's a wonderful state of mind. And it would be a much better world if we can all think that way all the time.
But isn't that, how to say, it feels a bit idealistic? I mean, yeah, of course, it would be awesome and great if everybody just recognized that, accepted that idea, and just generally start thinking more scientifically.
Sure.
Of course, but like right now, as of today, it's impossible. And right now, as of today, we have people on trials, we have people in prisons, we have the stigmatization, the blame, and I mean, what's going on in the world kind of shows that a lot right now. So, I mean, if how that wish that everybody would understand science and how that notion that, okay, science tells us that, how that can help solve problems now.
If you go in it and jump into the deep end and decide there's no free will whatsoever, and blame and praise make no sense at all, and in fact it's immoral to praise or blame anyone, and all of that, you're going to wind up as confused as I am and as incapable of really constructing how society is supposed to function. And what you're going to have to do is be a safe, undangerous professor sitting in front of a whiteboard talking about these abstractions, rather than someone who actually gets to decide, should this person be sent to jail? Or should we pull the plug and end this person's life? Or should we pay this person more money than that person, or tell them they're a better person because they're better at doing? Yeah. All you can do is do it a few pieces at a time. If somebody has an epileptic seizure and they lose control of a car and they kill someone in the process, we do not think like medieval peasants and say they were possessed by Satan, and we do not hate them for their evil soul. We feel incredible pain for the tragedy that crappy biology gave them a seizure at that moment. And we have a societal intervention that does not require hate. We say, oh, they need to go 6 months or longer on medication without a seizure before they're allowed to drive a car again. And we can solve that problem without hate fueling free will, playing a role in it. And we can have a society in which we do not hate women who cause their children to become schizophrenic because they could not love properly. And not only has society not fallen apart, we've become much better at decreasing the pain of schizophrenia. And, if we're going to have to do it one step at a time, one step where somebody is going to say, whoa, I had no idea biology had something to do with that. When you follow the science and you read what's happening in the journals and the rate at which new information emerging, that's happening 20 times a day in tiny little steps. If there's one little outpost where people are suffering because they are being held responsible for their terrible biological luck, and we learn instead, no, it's not them. Here's what's actually going on. Maybe this will get a better world, tiny little steps at a time.
You also mentioned that now at this point of you working on the book, you read a lot of philosophers. And it hurts your brain and you don't like it.
Yeah.
How, does, I kind of understand that it's a completely maybe different approach to solving problems, maybe at least how it feels from the outside of both basically science and philosophy. Kind of seems like science discovers how things are, philosophy tries to decide what to do with them and try to figure out things that are not existent in the world, such as justice, for example. And so, are you trying to somehow connect your scientific approach with philosophical ideas, and at what stage of connecting these two are you now?
Very incompetent. That much is very clear to me. And it's simply because the way my brain works, philosophy, political theory, things of that sort, literature, that's not realms in which I do very well. So it's just a limitation on my style of cognition. In terms of mixing the two, it is absolutely clear to me you cannot be a good neuroscientist unless you know something about philosophy, and you cannot be a good philosopher unless you have heard of the brain. It's hard, though. I'm not doing a very competent job yet of being a neuroscientist who really understands modern philosophical thought. And what's very clear to me reading a lot of these folks is there's not a whole lot of philosophers out there who've learned a lot about the brain. It's hard. It's a difficult challenge.
And I think I wrote you about that course, the Justice course by Michael Sandel. It's the one we just finished translating, and it's just surprising how often your name and your lectures come up in the discussions, but for some reason it's usually against the philosophy lectures, and I mean there are even no scientific claims there. It's just more like history and political philosophy and stuff like that, and law. But every once in a while, somebody appears saying, "Oh, this is crap. This is empty. This is just blah blah blah." Robert Sapolsky's lectures, they are awesome. All you need is just to understand biology and of human behavior, and you understand that there is no morality, and the justice is just a construct, and you don't need that. Could you maybe, I don't know, somehow settle this dispute down?
Well,
Do you think it even exists? This dispute between like science and philosophical applications?
No, I think they're inseparable in the same ways that nature and nurture are inseparable, and our best behaviors and worst behaviors because they're context dependent. No, it's all one big subject. And I think if you're really thinking hard about this, if you think that way and you say, I'm a neurobiologist, or you say, I'm a philosopher, all you're saying is the way my brain works is it turns out it's easiest for me to get at these issues from this direction, but it's just as valid to get at it from that direction. But I happen not to think very clearly that way. In terms of that, though, some of these folks are absolutely right, because I spend so much of my time tearing my hair out reading these philosophers. Because a certain level, like if you're Plato and you've never heard of the fact that if you get damage to this part of the brain, you will do antisocial damaging things. And if you take a medication for your Parkinson's disease, you have a 15% chance of becoming a compulsive gambler and losing your family's life savings. You are so mired in depression that you cannot get up in the morning, and you take another drug that blocks serotonin reuptake, you will begin to feel like life has a purpose. Plato could not have incorporated all of that into his philosophy. Like, you can't blame somebody from before that time. The philosophers who make me crazy are the contemporary ones. And by now, I like sarcastically, they all basically write the same paper, which could be reduced to 3 sentences. Sentence number 1. Wow, neurobiology has been learning all sorts of cool stuff. They're just learning all these new things at such a rapid pace. Sentence number 2. Some of these findings have challenged our very notion of individuality and agency and responsibility and free will. Sentence number 3. Nah, not really. Like, that's basically the paper. And here's the magical thing I'm now going to come up with why it really isn't the case. And I'm going to cite aspects of neurobiology that don't exist. Or I'm going to insist that there's emergent, transcendent things that happen in us that transcend biological constraints or even the constraints of the physical universe. Or I'm going to say that free will floats in the transactions between people, and that's a non-biological thought. And here's the magic that I'm going to invoke in the 3rd sentence that says, it's not really a problem with all that neurobiology is coming up with. And what makes me even crazier is the neurobiologists who occasionally write the papers like that. And what usually happens when you look closely, and I have one very renowned elder neurobiologist in the field who was incredibly accomplished, whose name I'm not going to mention, but who happens to think that way and has produced a bunch of books. And I've spent forever trying to understand why that is the case. And finally, the book that he has written most recently, which is an autobiography, explains it. He is a devoutly religious Catholic. And even how one neuron deals with ion fluxes of potassium and sodium, he sees to some extent through a mirror of his religiosity. Oh, okay, that's why he thinks that way. So, like, if you're a highly devout fundamentalist religious person trying to be a neurobiologist, my bet is your feelings about free will are going to make me get crazy at some point. And if you were 99% of the contemporary philosophers out there, as far as I can tell, your views about it are going to make me crazy as well, because at some point you're going to reach sentence number 3, where you're going to say, but yeah, that neurobiology doesn't really count, because we really do have free will.
Well, but again, no free will. Everything has basically a kind of biological reason outside of our control. And you're bringing again and again up the example with epilepsy and schizophrenia, which used to be blamed on people, now they're disease. Does that mean that, in your opinion, in some way, every bad person is just sick?
Yes. Or stated another way, every bad person is nothing more or less than the outcome of their biological luck. And their luck has been worse than any person out there who is nothing more or less than the sum of their biological good luck, which causes us to call them a good person, or a smart person, or an empathic person, or a talented person. That's all any of us are.
Another thing, that if we see the world this way, isn't that a bit the same as saying, oh, sorry, I was just following orders?
Yes.
In some sense. I mean, it didn't help. It didn't help during the Nuremberg trials, right? And for example, okay, nowadays the amount of police violence and law enforcement violence in general, I mean, it's not for me to tell somebody who lives in the US about that. So, I mean, here is actual problem right now. Should we approach it the same way? Should we say, oh yeah, they were just following orders, they're not responsible, plus there is no free will?
Yes. And that's so difficult. But if you're going to decide there is no such thing as blame or responsibility, somebody is allowed to say, don't blame me, I was just following the cumulative effects of the biological organism that circumstances made me. Does that mean I should run around the street being allowed to kill people? No, if the car's brakes are broken, you fix them. And in the exact same way, you should be able to say, don't praise me, I was just following a different set of biological orders. There's this wonderful moving YouTube thing, a graduation lecture a few years ago at Harvard University, where this kid who apparently had like the highest grade point average, number one in the graduating class, every year that person gives a little speech at graduation, and this kid got up and gave a speech, and this was a Korean American kid, and like basically what he literally said at one point is, you want to know why I'm up here? You want to know why I'm giving this speech, why I got to go to college, why I got to go to this college, why I did so well, et cetera, et cetera. It's because my parents snuck into the United States illegally, and they've been working their asses off for the last 30 years, washing dishes in the back of a Korean restaurant, hoping they're not going to be discovered and fired. That's why I'm here. That is the luck. That's the thing that I cannot be praised for. I am here because of that feature of my luck, and it could have been totally different otherwise. And don't forget it if you're sitting there in that chair feeling like you are entitled to some of the praise that you are getting now. And I thought that was incredibly moving. And yeah, that's what it's about. One thing you have to be totally on guard for is to not turn the don't blame me, don't praise me, I'm just following biological orders into and I cannot change. Because if you decide you cannot change, what we learn from this absence of free will is nothing can change, is predetermined. That's nonsense. That is not the case. Organisms change. If you are a sea slug, we understand how you could learn to do something new down to the regulation of every single relevant gene and every neuron in its nervous system. And a man named Eric Kandel about 20 years ago got the Nobel Prize for figuring it out. And when you look at all the bits and pieces, the enzymes, the transcription factors, the kinases, the phosphorylases, to throw out jargon like crazy, that you find in that sea slug, you find the exact same things in our nervous system, and the exact same things when you were learning to change. We do not choose to change because we don't choose to do anything. We are changed by circumstance. And in the book, like there's one chapter where I analyze the entire neurobiology down to sea slug, like molecular biology of like a year ago. I was driving on a highway, and I don't know if this is the case in Russia, but like Americans put bumper stickers on the bumper at the back of the car, a bumper sticker for which political candidate they support or what, some such thing. And a car drove past me with a bumper sticker saying, "Do a random act of kindness today." And like a phrase in English is random acts of violence. So there's this bumper sticker, "Do a random act of kindness today." And like somebody drove past me with that, and I glanced at it and I said, "Oh, that's nice. I bet they're a nice person. I bet they're politically liberal. Oh, I bet I would like them. Wouldn't that be interesting if they're on their way to go shoot somebody? Wouldn't that be ironic?" Whatever. And then I think of something else and I forget about them. I'm now thinking about something else. And then 15 seconds later, another car is signaling that they want to pull into the lane in front of me. And my first rotten thought is, oh, no, you don't. I'm in a rush and I'm ready to put my foot on the gas and go a little bit faster. And then for an eighth of a second, I think of that bumper sticker and I say, and I put my foot on the brake instead and I slow down and I let them in. I did not just choose to change my behavior, but amid believing in no free will whatsoever, I've just made the world this much better, of a better place, because my behavior was changed by circumstances. And I can tell you the circuitry of that down to the enzymes involved. There's no free will. We can't be blamed. We can't be praised. We're just following our biological luck. But at the same time, everything we learn about the biology of behavior is about the biology of change. And nothing about us is set in stone. And the most important versions of the biology of behavior to understand is that which explains how we change for the better or worse, how we are changed for the better or worse. Let's see, I'm not sure the schedule, but I actually have another Zoom call in about 5 minutes. I don't know if we're near to winding down.
Well, that's what I actually wanted to ask, because we have like literally hundreds of questions now from people coming in. But if we need to finish up, probably just one of the last ones. Again, considering your book, did anything in your thoughts about free will or morality or anything changed while you're working on this book? And when it's going to be ready? Everybody is waiting.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear. My editor is waiting also. But there's that damn chapter on quantum mechanics that I can't quite finish. The thing that has most surprised me is how intellectually I am completely at peace with the notion that there is no free will, and at the same time, something emotionally arousing happens, and a second later, I am angry at someone. I am blaming someone. I am hating someone. I am praising someone in my mind. I am feeling like I deserve to be praised for something, and I have to stop myself in my tracks and think through why it doesn't really work that way. What surprises me with this book, and what surprises me is all these decades after being a 13-year-old and realizing there's no free will, you still have to fight the strong emotions that pull you in the direction of thinking that way. So you got to think about a second time and a 10th time and a 100th time, and to be able to get back to that. When the book is going to be done, I don't know, because I'm sitting here like so horrified by the state of this planet and all of that my progress is very slow. It's officially supposed to be finished next March. I'm not optimistic. But nicely, there is already a Russian translation contracted, and I think there's a Ukrainian one as well. So that much
And
more.
that's not us.
The
Russian
I'm not
translators,
sure.
That's not us.
Is it you guys? I don't know.
No.
I should check with my publisher, but there's a bunch of translations already, which makes me that much more like agitated about how I'm like not getting the writing done fast enough. But hopefully next year. And thank you for like being interested in it. That's wonderful to hear.
We are very. If something goes wrong with whoever is translating your book, let us know. We'll take care of that in the best possible way.
Great. I will actually check with my publisher here, because very wisely they have not had me have anything to do with the process.
Okay. And well, I think we need. Are you running away? Are you hurrying for the next call? Right.
I actually probably should. Should we do this again sometime soon? This has been really fun.
Should we? Like every week, anytime? I mean, I'm really. I mean, I will send you screenshots of how much just likes and how much response every post about us doing this stream gets, and every other, like thousands. Like seriously, on YouTube it's like 5,000 or 6,000 likes on the first announcement. So I mean, and I really actually another thing I was hoping for, that maybe discussing the book one more time, maybe that can help you, or like kind of put your thoughts. I'm not sure if that's helping, or we're just distracting you from your work. But yes, sure. Everybody, I bet everybody's cheering right now. Yes, we want to do that again.
Well, so let's do that. About to start teaching, so that in addition to my writing, things are going to be hectic for about the next 3 months. But let's aim for after that, and who knows, maybe we'll all have even just gotten a vaccine, and that part of the world will look better.
So we'll stay in touch, and I will send you lots of emails.
Good, thanks. Well, thank you everyone, and be healthy and safe and biological.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, there is Ilya.
Good, thank you. And good, thanks, you too. Good night. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a good day. Bye-bye. Вот так. Да. Так, дамы и господа, извиняемся за этот небольшой технический перерыв. В общем, Роберт Сапольский. Похлопаем ему и всем, и передадим ему наши позитивные энергии, которых не существует. В общем, сегодняшний стрим был своеобразным экспериментом. Если вам понравилось, пожалуйста, оставляйте комментарии. Как вы слышали, Роберт повторить. Непонятно пока по времени, то есть, скорее всего, это будет не сильно скоро. Он вроде говорил, что следующие 3 месяца у него занято. За это время мы успеем перевести и озвучить этот наш диалог. Если вы хотите поддержать нас, поддержать процесс перевода, и чтобы ваше имя было увековечено в титрах тех, кто поддержал перевод, пожалуйста, в описании под стримом есть ссылка на наш Donate Alert. Заходите, если у вас есть возможность, естественно, материальное, любое пожертвование, мы вас обязательно упомянем и будем вам премного благодарны. Спасибо всем, кто на связи, кто нас смотрел. Да, стрим, сам этот стрим, естественно, остается на нашем главном канале, поэтому вы сможете его снова посмотреть, если вам вдруг захочется. И кто не успел посмотреть начало, например, то, как видео обработается, сможете перемотать все к началу, попрактиковать свой английский, попрактиковать аудирование. Извиняемся, что не смогли задать все вопросы, которые были прекрасные и хорошие, даже из тех, кто присылал заранее. Просто никогда не знаешь, насколько затянется разговор с Робертом и когда ему придется убегать. Но мы надеемся, что, так как мы созвонились не в последний раз, что все вопросы зададим. Еще успеем задать. И на данный момент трансляцию посмотрело более 30 тысяч человек. Это надо будет Роберту сказать, и его это обрадует. Это дико радует меня. Спасибо вам, ребята, что вы смотрите. И очень раз нас смотрят и те, кто знает английский. Ребята, вы просто молодцы. Вот видео постараемся перевести и озвучить ближайшее. Я не буду давать прогнозы, я боюсь. В ближайшее время максимально быстро. И все это выложить. Еще раз спасибо всем. Подписывайтесь, если кто-то почему-то еще на нас не подписан. Ставьте лайки, шеры. Вот. И на этом, я думаю... да, еще не забудьте позвонить в колокольчик, чтобы получать оповещения о новых видео, которые появляются на нашем канале. Если... Часто многие спрашивают по поводу книжек, есть ли Сапольские книжки и так далее. Да, они есть и в продаже, они есть и цифровые, и у нас даже есть вроде бы пара аудиоверсий доступны. Вот. Также, если у вас остались вопросы, посмотрите, пожалуйста, наши предыдущие 2 интервью с Робертом, где мы много чего говорим нового, что-то повторяется. Но что-то еще и новое, поэтому, возможно, ответ на свои вопросы вы найдете там. И, естественно, если вы еще тут по какой-то случайной причине не посмотрели лекции Роберта Сапольски «Биология поведения человека», все ваше в открытом доступе на нашем канале. Смотрите лекции, читайте книжки, смотрите другие видео. Не знаю, берегите себя и всем удачи.